So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our today's session of Keep Up with Pryme, where we will walk you through a few new features of our apps, and we'll also take a deep dive into a specific area. My name is Laura Andradas. I'm marketing lead at Pryme Global, and together with Aske Holst, product manager at Pryme Global, we will walk you through today's session. So let's see what's on the menu for today. We're going to start talking about some new features of both advanced projects and the Pryme apps. And afterwards, we'll take a deep dive into today's specific area, which is percent complete billing. And at the very end of the session, we'll leave some time in case you have any questions. So let's start with the advanced projects. Sorry. Here there's something worth mentioning, and it's that there's a new license check, which also affects existing customers. That means that you must accept the update before the advanced projects upgrade. In terms of project, now non-chargeable costs are also displayed so that you can get a better overview of the project's financials. And regarding time, the row total has been added to the timesheet. So let's see what's new for Pryme Time, our time tracking application. Here we see enhancements in terms of customization, since now you can set the desired time increment. This is very helpful for companies such as law firms or accounting firms. Then there's also a new shortcut to the time tracking calendar and a new timesheet period view. And a totals fact box has been added that provides an overview of your track time. Regarding the Pryme CIS tax retention, here we see enhancements mainly in terms of data validation of both the HMRC setup data and also the CIS subcontractor data. And last but not least, regarding Pryme Intercompany, we now can see the progress of a subscription manual run. And there's also a new column that shows external time entries. So that was it from my side. By now, I'll see you at the end of the presentation with the Q&A. And now I hand it over to Aske. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. And so let's have a look at some of the new features in a bit more detail. I will switch to a demo environment. We will start with the new license checking. And for most people, this should not matter, but it is important to know about. There is a new license check. The first time you open a sandbox environment, you might be asked to accept communications with a global licensing app. You will have to accept that. And the idea is that we now track licensing on a company by company basis. That doesn't change the current licensing model. The licensing model is still per user. The real intention behind this is that you can turn off or on specific companies in your setup. Currently, that doesn't have much of an effect, but going forward, we will start making areas of functionality disabled if you have not enabled progressors. The idea behind this is that in some companies or some organizations, there might be select companies that use progressors, but there could be companies who don't use progressors and do not want to see the fields that come when you install progressors. So for those scenarios, we will, in a future release, enable the ability to hide those. And that is basically what is being introduced with the new field in project setup. Currently, the effect of it is so little, so nobody will notice, but there is this new field, progresses active, which I could turn on. I will not turn off. I will not do this now because I want to use progresses, but you can turn it off. Again, as I say, currently doesn't have much of an effect, but that effect will become more and more pronounced over coming releases as we go through the UI and say, if progresses is not active, then we should not run progresses logic. We should hide the fields for progresses, etc. If you are in a situation where you want to enable a lot of companies for this, there is an assisted setup for it as well. You should be prompted on a new install in a new environment to run this. So there's a new license setup for progresses. And now this has already been done here because it is an upgraded environment. So I should not need to run it, but this will do a check of the license with the licensing server in the backend, check that I'm all set up with the correct licenses. And then it will allow me to activate separate companies in this list and decide which ones I want to activate. I will not do this now, but this is the idea. You can go through each one of them and check them off in a controlled fashion. So that was the licensing check. Next up, we have a small change, but a notable change. The change that non-chargeable costs are included in statistics. That turned out to be confusing previously, that if you had a project in your list and you looked at the statistics, for the budget part of it, it would only look at what was chargeable. So especially for a project where there's a lot of non-chargeable time on them, that would not be included. And of course, you could budget for time, which you expect to have, but you don't plan to charge for it, but it's still a cost in the project. Now we include all costs, even if you're not going to charge for the time associated with that cost. For Pryme Time, we have 3 changes. They are all related to the new time tracking calendar, which we showed in a last year. And what we've done is basically try to make it a little bit easier to use. If I'm in a timesheet, I can move now directly to my time tracking calendar, just as I could go to my time tracking. So I can go to time tracking. There I will see my time tracking entries, and I can make changes, etc. If I want to see that in a calendar view, I can go to the time tracking calendar and get a visualization of what I have tracked. And I can also, from my timesheet, go to the time tracking calendar. So now you can go back and forth and easily get to this time tracking calendar. In the time tracking calendar, one of the big requests we got was the ability to control how time is changed if you drag it. So now I've entered 45 minutes of time here, and I might want to say, well, actually it was a bit more. And so I'm going to drag it, and my next stop, so to speak, is the next hour. So here I'm working with 15-minute increments, and this is configurable. So in Pryme Time setup, it's possible to define what the increment of time should be. In some areas of business, there are special rules about that. And so I could say, maybe in an accounting firm where you're doing a lot of small tasks, I would like to have 6-minute increments of time. And so I need to close my calendar. I need to open it again in order for this to take effect. But now I can move this in very small increments and exactly define how long time I worked. Conversely, I could also say we always work with 15-minute increments, half-hour increments. You decide what the correct level of detail is. Next up, we added a fact box on the side here, which totals up how much time you have tracked here. And it also helps a little bit with the difference between the time as in hours and minutes versus the decimal time. That is often a question coming up. What is what? And it's not always to do that calculation in your head. We are now helping you saying, if I tracked 1 hour and 24 minutes, that's the same as 1.4 hours in decimal time, because when it comes to invoicing, we are always, of course, working with decimal time in the end. We also show how much of this time is not connected to any time entry yet. So that would not be included in my time entry until I say I want to update it and put it on my time entry. And I do see how much time I do have on time entries, which is in this case 7 hours, and what is my norm time. And in this case, it's a bit of a special case. It's only 16 hours because we are on a very short week, having only Thursday and Friday, because we're using the split week principle here. So it makes it easy to see how much am I missing in total. This fact box is also available on the time tracking, same fact box, same information, just trying to make it easier to see what are the totals. Is there something I am missing? Moving on, for Pryme CAS and Tax Retention, which is, of course, the app we have for the construction industry scheme and the relevant construction tax in the UK and Ireland, respectively, we have added some additional checks to make sure the data entered is correct. And we also made a number of UI enhancements. So if I open up my retention tax setup, if I'm going to set up my HMRC data, and in a field like this, I enter something incorrectly. Now, this is a correct number, but let's say I forgot some digits. In this case, it's a free text field. That's okay, we cannot check that. But this field, for instance, there is some limitations to how long it can be. And so different fields have different rules. What can we check? What can we check? And at least we can check if the field is not filled in, then we will make note of that. When it comes to the vendors, and that's of course where the users will be spending a lot more time than in setup. If I have a vendor, and for that vendor, I say I will use retention tax. First of all, we removed all of the retention tax related fields to a dedicated fast tab. It was simply getting too crowded inside of the invoicing. I now have some checking where I'm actually checking the format of that data as well. So if I just enter something like this, it'll say that is not a valid number. Of course, we cannot check if it is an actual valid number immediately on entry, but I see at least it doesn't have the right format. It must have a special format, and in this case, I need some more digits for this to be valid. And now it's at least forming to the number of digits needed in a number. Still, probably not a valid number, but that's what we have our verification feature for that I showed in the last update. So a little bit of features to make it a little bit easier to find, a little bit easier to avoid making mistakes, or when you make mistakes, we try to catch some of those early on. Last up, we have for intercompany, also more in the UI and making things easier. That's a general topic we're working a lot on now. Easy onboarding, ease of use. We will see when we run a subscription that there's a progress bar. Now, I don't have any subscriptions in here that are would be running long enough for even you to see that pop-up showing. So I cannot show you that, but I'll assure you that now we do show a progress where you see how far are we in the progress of processing messages, which is interesting, especially if you're processing large amount of messages. We see that around migrations, go lives, etc., where thousands and thousands of entries are processed. It's nice to see now we are at about halfway or how far we are. So you have an idea of, is this actually doing something? On the project level, we will see that we now have a new column. Again, here I don't have any data in it, but there is now a last column here And just to make it clear, it's this one external time, not posted, which we use for the scenarios where we integrate time between companies. And now you can see on a project level and down to the task level how much time we have coming in from other companies that will be cost on our projects, and we will potentially invoice out what is done by another company in our company group and transferred via intercompany. Just the same as we has ours on open timesheet. You could say this is the equivalent, but for time entries in another company. And so with that, that is basically what we have in the area of new features. I will spend the last 10 minutes to do a deep dive of one of the features we do get a number of questions on, which is percent complete billing. And percent complete billing is, I think, sometimes misunderstood, or at least not understood well enough. It is an easy concept to understand how it works. You define how far you are on a project, and then you bill according to that. But what's behind? What is the contract value? How is that calculated? I'll try to show a few examples in a few minutes just to give you a good idea, because it can be really useful. So I'll create a new project, and I'll actually not use a guided experience. I'll just create it as a blank. So it's not something where everything is prepared and I could have cheated in the background and done a lot of setup that will not show. No, I'll actually show everything I'm doing. So I'm setting up a new project. I'll create 2 tasks. I'll create a task 1, which I will call task 1, and let's create a task number 2 and call that one task number 2. I might also need a billing task, and we'll get back to that. But let's put it in there for now. And so these are my tasks. What I need to define on the project itself, and of course, the right way to do this is to create a project template and a task template and set up everything in there, but I want you to see what I'm doing, is to set the invoicing type to percent complete. And you can do that individually for resources, items, expenses. In this case, I'll not be using expenses, so I'll just do it for resources and items. Over here, there is a whole section to say use percent complete billing. I need to enable that, and that then makes a number of new fields appear. Again, here I'll say invoice percent complete for resources and for items. So I'm also enabling that. Then I can define if I'm allowed to override the completion percent. And this doesn't mean that I'll have to do it, but if I can. So this is more a permissive thing. We allow you to override the percent. So yeah, I trust myself. I'll allow myself to override the percentage. We'll have to decide what the percent complete is based on. And that can be either quantity or cost. Quantity is easy. You could say we have 100 hours on budget. We've used 30 hours, then we're 30% complete. But if you're not exclusively working with hours, but also having other countables, let's say items, it becomes very hard to do this by quantity, because how do you, if you both have nuts and bolts and pieces of steel, you cannot say just because we used 17 out of the 100 pieces we need, then we're 17% done. It does not make sense. So I think for most scenarios, cost is the better option, but there could be scenarios where you strictly want to count hours and then you can use quantity. Then you'll have to set a billing level, and that is probably the trickiest part to this. How do we define at what level of granularity we want to calculate our completion? There are 4 different options, and I will not go through all of them, but basically there are 2 schools of thought here. Either it's on the project level, meaning we roll up all the budget and all the usage on the entirety of the project, and we calculate one number, that is our completion percent. Then we find the contract value and apply that percentage to the contract value, and that's how much we will invoice. Oppositely, we can do it by task, and then we, of course, for each task, we find the budget for that task, we find the usage for that task, find the completion percent and a contract amount and calculate it, and so you will get one line on the invoice per task. I'll start with this simple scenario of project summary. And if I have project summary, then I must select a task for this, because I will calculate this for multiple tasks, but the actual sale of this will have to go to one specific task. And so I, in this case, created this billing task, which I will place it on. Then I can decide if I have a contract amount. The contract amount allows me to specify a contract amount. And I could put in here that say our contract amount in this case is 10,000. Then that is the contract amount. And then you will have to enter an account to use to post that. I could also decide not to have a contract amount and instead use my budgeted amount. So that's the other option. If I don't enter a contract amount, it will use my budget, and I'll go for that scenario right here. So with this setup out of the way, let's get back. Let's create a quick budget for this. So I will use a budget matrix. I will put in some time for some resources. In this case, doesn't matter who it is. Let's say it's Cassie I put in time for, and we need, let's say, 16 hours on task 1 and 24 hours on task 2, just to make it simple. So that gives us a total budget for this. Of course, I could be nice and add some total so we can see what the total is. But in this case, of course, if I calculate now, I'll get 0%. And we can actually do that. We could go in and say percent complete billing, calculate percent complete. It will ask me for a calculation date, and it will only take into consideration what was prior to that date. I can even select out certain tasks, do other filters, etc. And then it'll say, well, in this case, we are calculating for cost for everything. My total budgeted quantity was 40, the 16 plus the 25. The actual quantity is 0. And my budget total was this amount. Of course, I didn't spend anything of it. My contract amount is 4,000. And why is that 4,000? Well, that's because on these 40 hours, I had a price list defining an hourly rate of 100. So that's how it finds my contract amount. This is the amount I could override on the project card and enter a specific amount independent of my budget. And then, of course, it calculates that we're 0% complete, meaning we're not going to invoice anything so far. So far, quite boring. But if I go into my timesheet, I have some, I could enter some time on this. So let's go to the matrix view and say, enter some time on our new project here, which I didn't give a name. That was a bit lazy. But let's put some time on task number 1. I will put in this case, 5 hours here. And I might put some time on task number 2 as well. So task number 2, I enter, let's say 5 hours as well here. And then we submit that timesheet. Now I don't have any approval steps, so this goes directly to the project, meaning we will now have usage on the project. So going back into my project, I will see that we now have some usage on here. And if we look at this, we can see that our budget here was 880 and our cost 330. So we're getting somewhere here. Of course, we're not so far. And looking at these existing columns for percentage completion calculation, we see that we have 31.25 and 20.83. And this is actually counting by quantity, but as we only have one resource and everything costs the same, this should give us an indication on where we are. And when we do the percent complete billing, we will see that we get a percentage. In this case, it says our budgeted quantity is 40, actual quantity is 10. But remember, we're not using the quantity in this project. We are looking at the amounts. So in this case, 2,200. Our actuals were 6,060. That means we are 30% complete. And that also means because we have a contract amount of 4,000, the total to invoice for this project is 1,200. We have not done any prior calculation where we invoiced for it, and so we will invoice 1,200. And this is where I get to go in and change. Because I allowed a change of percent complete, I can now go in and say, well, I want to be a bit more careful. Let's say we're only 27%, and I can then generate a percent complete invoice, and that generates an invoice for me with the information based on the 27% of 4,000, giving me 1,080 for a total on that entire project. The principle is the same if we go for another model. If we do it by task, then of course we will have multiple lines in here. Now that I've created my invoice, we can see I have an invoice number here, and I can go in and say show document, and we will see the invoice. So you get the invoice immediately. Of course, if you're not satisfied, and now I don't have any descriptions on anything here, so yeah, that's my bad, but I get my invoice for the correct amount. I can, of course, post that. And that also means that the next time I do a percent complete calculation, it will only create an invoice for the difference. And that is the basic principle. And so we would go on doing percent complete calculations on a regular basis. That might be monthly, that might be something else. I think we're about out of time now, so I will end my presentation.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And we wish you a lovely afternoon and a great weekend, which is around the corner. Have a great day. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.